Okay, guys, so what we're going to do with this is I tried to do a loom with this and it didn't work very well, so let's just practice this. When we're talking about addition and subtraction of integers, first thing we got to remember is what we've already learned, and that is that no matter what, if we start at a certain number, doesn't matter which number, okay? If we add a positive, let's say no matter where we're starting, if we add positive 7, okay, then we're going to go to the right, okay? And if we subtract positive 7, we're going to go to the left, okay? And what we discussed was also if we add a negative 7, we're going to go to the left. So if we subtract a negative 7, we're going to go to the right. Okay? It doesn't matter if we're talking about 7, 8, 12, 15, 368. If we're subtracting a positive of that number, we're going to go to the right. If we're subtracting a positive of that number, we're going to go to the left. If we're subtracting a negative of that number, we're going to go to the right. Okay? Now, what I did teach you was we can take everything and make it addition. So if we rewrite things as addition, and it makes our life a little more simple, because then if we look, then all we're worried about is if we make everything addition, then what we need to remember is that if we add a positive 7, we go to the right. And if we add a negative 7, we go to the left. Okay? So if we turn all statements into addition statements, then these are the only two things we have to remember. Okay? All right. So now what we're going to do is, I better copy this. Okay? So again, we're not going to worry about where we started at first. We just know we're going to start somewhere, and we're adding a positive 7, which means we're going to the right. We're going to add positive 7 and go to the right. And you don't have to put that parentheses, or I'm just trying to make sure it's really clear. That's what it looks like when we say we're adding positive 7. Now, the fact that we started at negative 5 and that 0 is 5 away from negative 5 means that our answer is going to be positive 2. Because if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 over, then we're going to land at positive 2. Okay? So again, if I know that I'm starting at negative 60, it doesn't matter which one, but if I'm adding a negative, when I add a negative number, I'm going to the left. So I'm going to add negative 30. And I really think that for those of you that are struggling with this is the simplest way to look at it. You look first at the action that's happening. We're adding negative 30. And then put down what number you're starting with, negative 65. And remember, 0 is clear over here. So for some that might be tempted to say negative 35, well, negative 35 is over here. And you're not going that right direction. So this would be negative 95. So 65 plus negative 30 is negative 95. So again, if I looked and said, well, I'm going to start here, I don't know, I'm not going to pay attention to that. I'm going to pay attention to what's happening. And I'm adding negative 45, which means I'm going to go to the left. But I started at 30. And 0 is 30 away from, is to the left, but it's 30 away, so where did I land? Well, I went another 15, so this could be negative 15. So 30 plus negative 45 is negative 15. Okay, so we'll save this again. Drag this down. So again, we're just going to use these arrows, right? We're going to use those as our examples, and we're just considering direction. Now, when we have subtraction, remember I taught you to change it into addition. You can change any of these into addition by adding their inverse. So we talked about in the beginning that if you had 4 minus 3, that equals 1. And that you could have 4 plus negative 3, and that also equals 1. Okay? And since they give us the same result, we could see that what we just did was we changed, this was positive 3 here, so we changed it to 4 plus negative 3. So the inverse of 3, positive 3, is negative 3. We changed this to the operational inverse and used the additive inverse. So we used the inverse operation, which the inverse operation of subtraction is addition, and then we use the additive inverse of the number that we were subtracting. So we would have 4 plus negative 3. This also allows us to commute. Okay, so if I change this, then I'm going to change this one. If I look at this problem, 30 minus negative 45, I change this to plus, but that means I have to change the negative 45 also to its inverse, which is positive 45. So now I'm going to look at this and say, well, if I'm adding positive 45, I'm going to go to the right. Because if I look over here, when I add a positive, I go to the right. Okay, and so I'm going to add 45 to 30. I mean, and zeros over here, so I'm going to land at 75. So 30 minus negative 45 equals 75. Okay. Now, if I look at this next one, again, I'm not going to look at the beginning number, but I'm going to look at what am I doing? What's the action? I'm subtracting negative 17. So if I look at that, I would take it, say, well, I'm going to change this to be addition, which means this is going to be positive 17. I'm still, if I'm adding a positive 17, I'm still going this way. I'm starting at negative 25, and 0 is like way over here because it's 25 away from negative 25. And so what that means is I land at negative 8. So negative 25 minus negative 17 is negative 8. I mean, there's other ways to look at this. You could have said, if I have 25 negatives and I take away 17 negatives, how many negatives do I have left over? You have 8 negatives left over. But if you're just going to stick with the number line, and for me to just keep this simple for you, this is what I'm going to suggest you do. Okay? All right, so let's copy this again. This is the rule that I would say, guys, just keep that with you. Just as a reference. Okay, so if I look at this problem now, okay, then again, it's subtraction, so I want to make it addition. I mean, making addition allows me to be able to use commutative property also. Okay, so I'm going to look at this. I don't worry about this number because I'm looking at the operation and I want to change, instead of having subtraction, I want to make this addition. So I have to make that 15 plus negative 34. Okay, well, if I'm adding a negative, that's right here. So if I'm adding a negative, I'm going to go to the left. So here I am. I'm going to add negative 34. Now, just so happens that I'm starting at negative 15, which means zero's over here on the right. So if you came up with an answer of 19, then you know you're going the wrong direction, because when you draw this, you could see zero's over on the right-hand side. So, and I'm going to the left, which means I'm just going to get the negative 49. Because this was negative 15. So negative 15 plus negative 34 is negative 49. And again, if you think about it as, hey, I have 15 negatives and I'm going to add 34 more negatives, then you're going to have 49 negatives, okay? Okay, so then it gets a little more difficult, but not much. If we're still using the same rules, but when we have more than two terms in there. So if I look at this first one, everything is already addition, so I don't have to do anything with that. I'm just going to say, well, let's see, my first action is to add 17. And if it's addition, I can also use commutative properties. So some of you have learned that, oh, it's better to put the negatives together first, so I can commute and say this is still the same thing as negative 14 plus negative 15 plus 17. So now, again, it doesn't matter where I start. And if I added a negative 15, that means I'm going to go to the left, because when I add a negative, I go to the left. I can see that here. When I add a negative, I go to the left. So I'm going to add negative 15 here. And then what I'm going to do next is add positive 17. So this is, I go to the right when I add a positive. So, and I want to know, well, where do I land? Well, so if I started out at negative 14 and I went to the left 15, well, 0 is over here. So I'm going to go that way, which will give me negative 29. And then I went to the right 17 from negative 29, which means I'm going to land at negative 12. So this adds up to negative 12. Of course, there's other ways to do this. You can use commutative property. You can break things up. You can use associative property. You could have looked and said, I want to get a 17 and a negative 17 together. You could have taken two negatives from the 14, gotten a 0 there, so you'd have negative 12. That would work. Okay, now if we look at this problem on the bottom, again, I want to turn everything into addition, which means if I were to rewrite this, okay, if I rewrote this, I would rewrite it as negative 19 plus negative 5 plus positive 17. Okay, well, so then again, if I'm looking at my number line, I'm going to start somewhere, and I'm going to add a negative 5. So I'm adding negative 5. That means I'm going to go to the left. Okay, and then I added a positive 17, which means from there, I'm going to go to the right, because I'm adding a positive. I'm going to add positive 17 here. And I want to know, where did I wind up? Well, if I looked, I could say, well, I started at negative 19, which means 0 is 19 away. When I go to the left 5, because I'm adding a negative,